Welcome back, June 29th, 2021. When we brought Sebastian Gorka along with Andy Biggs and Mike Gallagher out here a few weeks ago, Seb said something I've not gotten out of my head, especially given a few developments since. He was speaking of how small a group of committed patriots our Revolutionary War constituted in military service. Less than 50,000 at any given time. Sometimes you will see the Roman numeral 3 to represent this, giving air to the popular notion that no more than 3% of the population in the colonies at the time supported the military effort against the crown. For perspective, closer to 10% of Americans fought in World War II. Do you know that, Bill? Dave? John? Do you know that? Almost 10%. For further context, less than 0.5% of Americans don the uniform of the United States today. You've never seen anything like a majority of our population willing to wear our nation's uniform, and part of this is quite to be expected and constitutes some of what makes the honor of serving our nation and the debt we owe those honored and honorable unique and special. As John Stuart Mill put it, war is an ugly thing, but not the ugliest of things. The decayed and degraded state of moral and patriotic feeling, which thinks nothing is worth a war, is much worse. When a people are used as mere human instruments for firing cannon or thrusting bayonets in the service and for the selfish purpose of masters, such war degrades a people. A war to protect other human beings against tyrannical injustice. A war to give victory to their own ideas of right and good, and which is their own war carried on for honest purpose by free choice, is often the means of their regeneration. A man who has nothing which he is willing to fight for, nothing which he cares more about than he does his personal safety, is a miserable creature who has no chance of being free unless made excuse me, he has no chance of being free unless made and kept so by the exertions of better men than himself. As long as justice and injustice have not terminated their ever-renewing fight for ascendancy in the affairs of mankind, human beings must be willing when needed to do battle for the one against the other. There's a lot there. But I always seize myself on the line, we are kept free by exertions of better men than ourselves. Better men than myself get to be, are part of that 3, 10, or 0.5%. And I was thinking about all that and what I refer to as our downgraded, decayed state of patriotism here, efforted as it has been for at least the better part of 2 generations via junk thought, crap curricula, and revolutionary zeal. That is the troika most affecting our culture and country right now. Junk thought, crap curricula, and revolutionary zeal. In everything from 1619 to critical race theory, from BLM to multiculturalism, the re-racialization of our society and revised, I should say, revisionist and rewritten history of our country takes place daily before us. But it cannot happen where the culture opposes it. And I worry about whether it does or it does enough. We've gone through several years of using the national anthem as a protest point for race problems in America, but only first after the race problems were rubbed raw, exploited, and weaponized, sometimes via hoax, sometimes via hyperbole. There had to be a terrain, though, a grounding, an earth for anti-patriotism and anti-Americanism to grow and thrive, if not to simply photosynthesize and exist. I was thinking about that in the context of a few other things before us. Note the playoff games. What happened to all the NBA and BLM signage and paraphernalia? Is the problem over? Or was the problem created in the first place just because a Republican was president? I mean, I could be wrong, but it seems odd that the one thing the Biden administration has solved in 6 months is the problem of black lives not mattering for over 220 years as we've been told, of a sudden, it seems to be all fixed, doesn't it? But notice, if I'm right, the blasé attitude over such as Gwen Berry turning her back on the American flag as she literally represents, the country that flag represents. We are a different country today. Today, only conservatives speak of this incident, and the Biden administration, which leads the U.S. government, stood behind and defended Gwen Berry. We are a different country today. In 1968, when Tommy Smith and John Carlos raised black power fists in protest at the U.S. Olympics representing the United States of America, they were suspended. More, the culture was on the side of America then. Time magazine editorialized, quote, "Faster, higher, stronger is the motto of the Olympic Games. Angrier, nastier, uglier better describes the scene in Mexico last week." Brent Musburger, a writer for the Chicago American before rising to prominence as a CBS Sports and ESPN reporter, described Smith and Carlos in 1968 as, quote, "a couple of stormtroopers who were ignoble, juvenile, and unimaginative," according to Wikipedia. We're a different country today. Megan Rapinoe, also representing the United States, can blast the country and flag and then get rewarded with a White House visit and major corporate endorsements and advertising gigs. Colin Kaepernick, who started all this, makes millions from Nike, which makes its millions off slave labor, and nobody cares. Instead, headlines like this from the New York Times are simply irrelevant to making Nike and Coca-Cola dream palace heroes of the woke and progressive left in America. Here's a New York Times headline I bet not too many know about. Quote, "Nike and Coca-Cola lobby against Xinjiang forced labor bill," close quote. First sentence, quote, "Nike and Coca-Cola are among the major companies and business groups lobbying Congress to weaken a bill that would stop imported goods made with labor in China's Xinjiang region, according to congressional staff members, as well as lobbying records that show vast spending on the legislation," close quote. Vast spending is code for many multiple millions of dollars. Of course, the woke and progressive left will lecture us on Islamophobia and slavery in America unceasingly. Plank of wood meets speck of sawdust. And somehow, Coke and Nike have moral high grounds to lecture us on election reform? I see what kinds of methods they have no problem with. Tyrannies, where the first thing they would find is that there is no word for free and fair elections. Maybe sit out your critiques of America right now, then, Nike, Coca-Cola, others. Fraus omnia corrumpit. The fraud corrupts everything it touches. I was thinking of all this in the context of A, what the half of 1% today believe when they see all this, and B, how we are going to increase that half of 1%. Right now, we're doing everything we can to stall addressing that second question, building our military. As for the half of 1% and what they must think, especially as their leading general tells them they work in an industry problemed not by Islamic or Marxist anti-Americanism, but by white rage, so problemed that it is better understood through the eyes and teachings of Mao Zedong, Lenin, and Marx. At least in the upper echelons of the military, they make no pretense of how they believe it is best to help understand America from the teachings of Mao, Vlad, and Karl. I suppose if you're supposed to break things and kill people, no American or Western hero or institution has anything on Mao Zedong, Vladimir Lenin, and Karl Marx. They've broken an awful lot and killed even more, just for the wrong reasons. And so we've nearly fully completed the circle of taking our national and patriotic instruction, in part, sometimes in large part, from America's and indeed humanity's worst abusers of civilization. Never mind enemies of America. And we wonder how this happens. We truly do make men without chests now. I told you about one such case that received federal court countenance in the instance of a 17-year-old Virginian transgender boy yesterday. It's a slightly different issue, but not unconnected when you think a little beyond the shallow with regard to why human beings even deserve or have fundamental, or what used to be called natural rights in the first place. Because there is that very difficult word that ineluctably keeps crashing into us, as if without seatbelts, brakes, or airbags, the N-word, nature. We erect a country on the basis of natural law and natural right, and ever since there have been elements here trying to deny that very thing, that very touchstone of our founding and granting of rights and privileges. It's what defines our relationship to God and animal, and it's what defines our relationship with our government and with each other. It's what made slavery inimical and segregation in conflict with our creed and founding. You pick that apart, you pick everything apart. It is the thread that unites the rest of the warp and woof that is America. Which is why, as you know, I find it so frustratingly ironic that the left today is using the ideology and talking points about our founding and slavery and racism that could be directly lifted from the speeches of and court decisions in favor of the United States Confederacy's leaders during the Civil War and in the years leading up to it. I suppose when we say the GOP and Republican Party and conservative movement has never really changed from its essence to combat the extension of slavery and to fight other relics of barbarism, it's anatomically connected to the inseparably from the inverse point that the progressive left, born of secession and opposition to natural rights and supportive of slavery, the KKK, lynching, segregation, Jim Crow, they have never really changed either. Indeed, what more do you expect from a denial of natural right than an affirmation of the importance of race, or at a minimum finding race more important than humanity? But so we beat on, the tide against the culture, at first and now part and parcel of it, such that the distinction between the direction or tide of the culture is no longer evident, having become but one and the same ocean we swim in, and may sometimes feel like we're drowning in. Gwen Berry told CBS, quote, "I don't rally patriotism over basic morality. The commercials and statements and phony sentiments regarding black lives were just a hoax," close quote. Nobody asks to rally patriotism over morality. What we expect is an understanding of morality, because it makes patriotism here so much the easier when we unite the two. The funny thing, for the first 2 decades of the progressive effort here, morality, the concept of morality, was dismissed as quaint, if not always subjective. Today, it's been accepted as a concept to be distorted, to only work in one direction: self-importance, ego, and anti-Americanism. Those are the moral imports and values of today's progressives. Maybe Gwen should stand for China. That way she can operate without the base alloy of hating a country for its systemic racism. And when her contract with Puma runs out, I'm guessing Nike will come a-callin'. It will not be a long-distance phone call, I don't think. I'm Seth Leibson. We'll be right back.